Sure.
Congresswoman Mace came out of a classified briefing and seemed to reveal some of what was reportedly discussed about possible ground operations in Iran. There's people who ask, why should the administration brief Congress when Congress can't keep a secret? Are there any punishments for Congresswoman Mace in this instance?
Well, it is not lawful to leak classified information. I'm not suggesting that's what Nancy did there, but it is a problem. I mean, we had a big briefing for all House members in the Congressional Auditorium, and it's a lower level of classification because some of these things are so sensitive, and there is a breach of trust here. And that's a problem for the institution and something we need to address in the long run, because we've got to get back to these. Secrecy is important, especially at a time of international.
It starts with a simple question about a leak, but within minutes, it turns into something much bigger. Because what Mike Johnson walks into as a routine interview quickly becomes a series of moments he cannot control. And when the conversation shifts to polling numbers, that's when everything starts to unravel.
Mar-a-Lago flip. Democrats win the Trump hometown Florida House district. This is a state house race. Emily Gregory defeated Trump-endorsed GOP state house candidate in a hotly contested race. The president, obviously, in his backyard, and he won that district overwhelmingly. As you look at that, do you see a canary in the coal mine about November?
I don't at all. In fact, I talked with the president about this after that election result came in, and his team. These special elections are a one-off, and they're anomalies. That's why we call them special. There was circumstances in that race at the state legislative level not involved with Congress. I am very bullish about November, very bullish about the midterms.
Even right now,
Absolutely.
Even looking at everything that's coming up.
Absolutely right. And I give you a very boring 90-minute slideshow, Brett, to prove to you all the reasons
we
we're going to win.
Minutes,
we don't have it. But look, it summarizes us having a great record to run on. Promises made, promises kept. The big, beautiful bill, Working Families Tax Cut, is going to be working for middle and lower class earners, and they'll feel the effects of that and know they made the right decision, because we had a big demographic shift in 2024, and I think we hold those voters. We got better candidates. We have more funding right now. We have a president who is running like he is on the ballot, and he is out doing rallies around the country and rallying the base. We're going to have a midterm convention for the first time in history in September, right before early voting, to parade all of these stars in our great record across the stage. I feel very good about this. I believe we're going to defy history and grow the Republican majority in the House.
Right away, you can feel the tone of this interview tightening. That first clip wasn't just about a leak. It was about control. Johnson is trying to walk a fine line, acknowledge the issue without admitting weakness. He calls it a problem, but pushes solutions into the future. That's a subtle move, but an important one. Because when leadership is firm, problems are addressed directly. When things are uncertain, they get reframed. And that's exactly what's happening here. Then the conversation shifts from internal discipline to actual election results. Now, instead of hypotheticals, we're dealing with outcomes. A district closely tied to Trump flips, and the host asks the obvious question: is this a warning sign? Johnson's response is immediate and revealing. He doesn't analyze the loss. He doesn't explore the implications. He dismisses it, calls it an anomaly, says special elections don't reflect broader trends. But here's the problem. That argument only works if it's truly isolated. Because what the clip doesn't fully spell out, but what's critical to understand, is that this isn't just one result. There's a pattern forming across multiple races, seat shifts, momentum changes, a gradual trend that's becoming harder to ignore. So when Johnson brushes it off, it doesn't come across as confidence. It starts to feel like deflection.
You heard some of those polls that Jackie talked about, new Fox News polls. The president doesn't love Fox News polls, but these polls track with other polls that we're watching. How do you feel about the way things are going in the U.S.? Satisfied now, 36. Dissatisfied, 64. The approval of President Trump on inflation and the economy down to 28 and 34%. Those are tough numbers, and you're a little way away from a midterm, but they're real.
They're real. The president was on the previous program with the 5, and he was talking about the 100% support he has in MAGA, and those are CNN polls showing that. Look, those numbers are not surprising right now, because there's a lot of frustration in the country about the wait times at TSA, about gas prices. So much of this is and about the war, and the gas prices and the conflict in Iran are directly related. That is going to resolve soon. We very much believe that. We're very hopeful about that. And when it does, we get right back to the growing economy. Because remember, we did the one big beautiful bill, the Working Families Tax Cut. We did that so that people would have bigger paychecks and bigger tax refunds. That's what they will be experiencing again as soon as it does.
This is the moment where everything tightens. Up until now, Mike Johnson has been navigating, carefully choosing words, redirecting pressure, keeping things just stable enough to avoid a direct hit. But this is different. Because now, the conversation leaves the world of interpretation and enters the world of measurement. Numbers. Cold, fixed, difficult to spin numbers. And the host sets it up in a way that makes it even more uncomfortable. He doesn't just present the poll, he frames it. He acknowledges, right up front, that these numbers may not be popular, that they've been criticized before, that even Trump himself doesn't like them. But then comes the key line. They align with other polls, meaning this isn't an outlier. It's not a one-off. It's not something you can dismiss as biased or flawed. It's part of a pattern. And that's what makes this moment so difficult to navigate. Because in political interviews, there are usually escape routes. You can question methodology. You can challenge the source. You can pivot to a different data set. But when multiple data points start saying the same thing, those exits disappear. Now let's slow this down and really understand what's happening beneath the surface. The numbers themselves are important, but what they represent is even more critical. We're looking at three key signals here. When dissatisfaction significantly outweighs satisfaction, it tells you something fundamental. People aren't just unsure, they're actively unhappy. That's a completely different political environment. Uncertainty can be managed. Dissatisfaction demands change. And once that sentiment takes hold, it spreads fast. Because dissatisfaction is contagious. It moves through conversations, through media, through everyday experiences. And it reshapes perception. These are not minor categories, these are core issues. The economy is often the single most influential factor in how voters decide. So when approval drops here, it's not just a political problem, it's a structural one. Because messaging can only go so far. If people feel financial pressure in their daily lives, no narrative can fully override that. And that's the disconnect Johnson is trying to bridge. This might be the most important factor of all. Because one poll, you can question it. Two polls, you can debate them. But when multiple independent sources start showing the same trend, that's when it becomes reality. And that's exactly what the host is emphasizing. Now watch how Johnson responds under this level of pressure. He doesn't reject the data. That would be too risky. Instead, he reframes it. He shifts from validity to timing. He essentially argues, yes, the numbers are low, but here's why. And the reasons he gives are familiar. Gas prices, travel frustrations, global conflict, general public stress. All of these are real. All of them contribute to public sentiment. But here's where the strategy becomes fragile. Because his entire argument rests on a single assumption, that these problems are temporary. Calling something temporary in politics is always a gamble, because it ties your credibility to the future. If conditions improve, you look accurate, even confident. But if they don't, that same statement becomes evidence that you misread the situation. And that's the risk Johnson is taking here. He's not just explaining the numbers, he's predicting their reversal. And timing makes this even more critical. Because we're not years away from political consequences, we're moving toward them. Which means there's limited time for conditions to improve, perception to shift, momentum to rebuild. And momentum in politics is everything. Once it starts moving in one direction, it builds on itself. Positive momentum attracts support. Negative momentum amplifies doubt. Right now, based on these numbers, the direction is not favorable. This is where one of the biggest challenges emerges, the gap between messaging and lived experience. Johnson is presenting a narrative of progress, control, confidence, but the numbers suggest something else: frustration, concern, dissatisfaction. And when those two realities don't align, voters tend to trust what they feel over what they're told. That's not a partisan issue, that's human behavior. Now layer this with everything else discussed earlier in the interview: internal party tension, election losses, questions about authority, global instability. Each of these adds weight, individually manageable. Together, they compound. And that's what makes this moment feel heavier than a typical polling discussion, because it's not happening in isolation. It's part of a broader environment of pressure. Another detail that shouldn't be overlooked: the role of the host. The tone here isn't aggressive, it's measured, but it's firm. And that's what makes it effective. Because instead of attacking, he's presenting. Instead of arguing, he's clarifying. And that forces Johnson into a more difficult position. because he can't push back emotionally. He has to respond logically. And this is where the limits of Johnson's strategy start to show. Reframing works up to a point, but it has constraints. You can explain numbers, you can contextualize them, you can delay their impact, but you can't erase them. And over time, if the data doesn't change, the explanations lose effectiveness. That's the stage where narratives begin to collapse. So what does all of this actually mean moving forward? It suggests three possible paths. Path 1. Conditions improve quickly, numbers recover, narrative holds. Path 2. Conditions stay the same, numbers stagnate, pressure builds. Path 3. Conditions worsen, numbers decline further, narrative breaks. Right now, Johnson is clearly betting on path 1. But the data? It hasn't confirmed that yet. And that's why this moment stands out. Not because it's dramatic, not because of any single exchange, but because of what it reveals. A leadership figure, confronted with consistent negative data, choosing to explain rather than adjust. That's a critical point in any political cycle, because it tells you where things might be heading. And from here, the rest of the interview starts to make more sense. Because once the numbers are on the table, everything else is filtered through them. Every answer, every claim, every projection. They all connect back to one question. Do the numbers support it or contradict it? And right now, that tension is only getting stronger. And if you find this helpful, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell.